When we set out, we were looking for a proven winner and an elite leader. We're fortunate we were able to find both.
The New York Giants' future just got ruined by a general manager trying to save his own job. The Giants were finally in a great position to build something real. They have an exciting young offense with Jaxson Dart, Cam Scatterbo, and Malik Nabers, and an equally talented defensive core with Dexter Lawrence, Abdul Carter, and Brian Burns. And instead of hiring a new coach with promise who can maximize the talent on this roster, they elected to hire John Harbaugh. Knowing he's on the hot seat, Joe Schoen aimed for the safe name that looks good in a press conference. The issue is that this is an outdated, short-sighted move that completely ignores where the rest of the league is going. When the rest of the NFL is zigging, you need a great reason to zag, and John Harbaugh is not a good enough reason. In a league where everyone is aiming for young schematic gurus, the old master of none coach is the wrong decision. This isn't how you build Super Bowl contenders. This is how you buy yourself continued mediocrity. The Giants aren't playing to win, they're playing not to lose, and that recipe never works in the NFL. So come with me as I break down the Giants offseason, what actually went wrong last season, why this coaching hire misses the mark, and what they should actually do in free agency and the draft to salvage the situation, because despite this hire, the talent is still there. With that being said, let's fix the franchise. Welcome back to Fixing the Franchise, the series where we go team by team breaking down how each front office should approach the offseason to build real Super Bowl contenders. We'll look at coaching decisions, roster construction, free agency strategy, and the draft to create a realistic path forward. Timestamps are below if you want to jump ahead, and let me know in the comments what you think the Giants should do this offseason. Now, before we dive into why the Harbaugh hire is a mistake, we need to properly contextualize last season first, because to understand where this franchise is going, we need to understand how we got here in the first place. And heading into the season, the Giants were facing an uphill battle from the jump.
Well, for me, best case scenario for the New York Giants, record-wise, 5-12. That's the best case scenario I see.
Not only do they have to play 6 games against the likes of the Cowboys, Commanders, and the then reigning Super Bowl champion Eagles, but they also had to play 2 of the strongest divisions in the NFL, in the NFC North and the AFC West. Additionally, they even got drawn extra games against the 49ers and New England Patriots. So the Giants already had a foot in the grave before a single snap was even played. So when they opened 0-3 with Russell Wilson at quarterback, it wasn't exactly shocking. But then everything would change in week 4 as Jaxson Dart would take over as the starter, and immediately there was a noticeable energy shift. With young playmakers like Malik Nabers and Cam Scatterbo injecting life into this offense, the Giants looked like a completely different team, and they would go on to upset the Chargers for their first win of the season. Unfortunately, however, that game would continue the trend of bad luck that would define the Giants' season, as Malik Nabers would tear his ACL and miss the rest of this season. However, despite his injury, the Giants would go on to upset the Eagles at home, and it briefly looked like they might actually be building something. But then everything fell apart.
Snap, placement, kick on the way. It is good!
The beginning of the end would start with the Giants blowing a 26-8 fourth quarter lead to the Denver Broncos. The following week, then the Giants would lose Cam Scatterbo to a gruesome season-ending ankle injury and a blowout loss to the Eagles. And just 2 weeks later, heads would roll. After a blown 10-point lead against Chicago, the New York Giants would fire Brian Daboll. Unfortunately, this would not help their season as they would proceed to drop their next 5 games, and after 2 meaningless Week 17 and Week 18 victories, the Giants would end this train wreck season 4-13. Before we dive into the Harbaugh hire, I do need to go out on a limb and say something that might not be popular, but I think the Giants are making a huge mistake in firing Brian Daboll. I mean, he's been the only guy here that has been able to have real success since Tom Coughlin left. And in his first season, he won a playoff game with Daniel Jones. And their offense was actually decent that year. They ranked 16th in points per game. The next 2 seasons, the offense would crater, but that had everything to do with quarterback instability. You know, when you're trotting out Tommy DeVito, Tim Boyle, and Drew Lock, yeah, you're going to be a bottom 3 unit. But here's the thing. When they finally got a real NFL quarterback back in the building, the offense immediately bounced back to 17th in points per game. Jaxson Dart was Daboll's guy, and he proved that he could play. So firing Daboll after only 7 games with his quarterback, in my opinion, that's harsh. especially when the entire issue with this team wasn't the offense at all. It was the defense. Before Shane Bowen took over as defensive coordinator, the Giants defense allowed 23.9 points per game. And in his first season, that number rose to 24.4 points per game. But in this season, in his time in charge, his defense allowed 27.8 points per game. This defense was actively regressing under his watch. In his 29 games in charge, this defense allowed 25 points or more 16 times. Over half of his games, the offense would have to score close to 30 points just to have a chance to win. And that's not sustainable, even if you have Josh Allen or Patrick Mahomes at quarterback. And it's not even like this is a talent problem. This team has Dexter Lawrence, Abdul Carter, Brian Burns, Kayvon Thibodeau, Bobby Okereke, Javon Holland. Like, they have legit building blocks on that side of the ball. But Bowen couldn't scheme up a competent defense. He couldn't develop any of the young guys they were drafting. And here's where it gets even worse. The Giants defense immediately showed they were much better after Bowen was gone. In his 29-game tenure, the Giants held teams under 20 points 5 times. In the 5 weeks after he was fired, they held teams under 20 points 3 separate times. Think about that ratio. The defense was clearly being held back by the scheme. Shane Bowen was eventually fired after week 12, but that was way too late. The damage was already done. So this era is going to be remembered as Brian Daboll failing, when in reality, the defense was a giant liability that hurt a team already dealing with quarterback instability. Brian Daboll absorbed all the blame for those problems that weren't primarily his fault. And instead of giving him a real shot to develop his rookie quarterback with a competent defensive staff, they moved on. So as I said, I think moving on from Daboll was a mistake. Not only because the on-field production was decent, but because the Giants were never going to find a good enough replacement. There wasn't some slam dunk hire out there waiting for them, like the retread of John Harbaugh. Is that really going to change things? I don't think so. There are legitimately 21 other current head coaches I would rather have than John Harbaugh. Now, in theory, the idea behind hiring Harbaugh is that he would come in and stabilize the culture. With the reports of toxic nature of Daboll's tenure and his explosive temperament, I understand wanting to go the opposite direction with the mild-mannered John Harbaugh, but my issue is that he doesn't bring much else to the table. If you're bringing in a coach to strictly be the CEO-style coach who runs the organization smoothly, you need a guy who can build a truly elite culture. Not really good, elite. And I don't believe John Harbaugh can do that. Based on recent history, I wouldn't say the Ravens have had the strongest culture or coaching in the NFL. In the big games and big moments, they've consistently crumbled. They've been good, but not the consistent elite level you need from this style of hire, especially when you don't have the schematic edge that other coaches can provide. Ben Johnson, Mike Macdonald, Kyle Shanahan, Sean McVay. These are great examples of coaches who not only develop elite cultures and have success, but they bring true schematic advantages that most teams can't compete with. But with Harbaugh, we not only need to match these high-end cultures, we need to surpass them because we can't match their schematic advantages. And that's the problem. When it comes to the on-field production, Harbaugh is only as good as his coordinators, and that leads to 2 major issues. So issue number 1 is that great coordinators leave. If you find a great coordinator, he's going to go get hired somewhere else as a head coach. Perfect example, Mike Macdonald went from the Ravens defensive coordinator to winning the Super Bowl as the head coach in Seattle. Meanwhile, the defense for the Ravens struggled without him, and eventually they parted ways with Harbaugh. Ben Johnson is the same story. He left the Lions and won the division with the Bears, while the Lions went from the 1 seed to missing the playoffs entirely. This is a common recipe we keep seeing, and teams keep repeating the same mistake. Issue number 2 is that bad coordinators will cripple your team. If you don't find the right coordinators, you're going to have bad results. Look at the Eagles this season with Kevin Patullo versus last season with Kellen Moore. If you hire the wrong guy, that unit can become a crippling weakness that limits your entire upside. In the Giants' case, I think they win with option 2 because they hired Matt Nagy as offensive coordinator and Brian Callahan as their quarterback's coach. And holy shit, that is an absolute nightmare coaching staff. Nagy's offense was always bad in Chicago, and he couldn't develop a young quarterback. Then, when he went to Kansas City, the Chiefs' offense regressed, and Mahomes played the worst football of his career. Hiring Brian Callahan is just as bad. He only lasted 6 games into his second season as the head coach for a reason. Those Titans teams were horribly coached all around. So I just don't get pairing those guys with a young, exciting offense and a developing quarterback. I think they're going to get a fraction of what they could actually get out of these players. And unfortunately, the defensive side doesn't get any better either because they hired Dennard Wilson as their defensive coordinator. Wilson was Brian Callahan's DC in Tennessee, and that team had a bottom 5 defense both years he was in charge. And now I think we're really about to see how good this Titans defense could have been with Robert Saleh in charge. And I think that's really going to highlight how bad Wilson's coaching was. So I think we're due for an absolute disaster class and complete organizational failure. This is a scared move made worse by horrible coordinator hires, and it's going to set this organization back for years. Hot take, I think Harbaugh will be out before year 3. Now, unfortunately, I can't change who the Giants hired a head coach. So the best thing I can do is figure out how they should actually build this roster throughout free agency. And here's where I'm going to say something that might sound contradictory after I just spent the last 10 minutes ripping the Giants for playing it safe, but I think the Giants need to play it safe in free agency. And now, not because that safe is inherently good, but because right now they need to hedge their bets on a coaching staff and front office that hasn't proven it can maximize this talent. You don't buy a ring for someone you don't want to marry, and the Giants shouldn't be committing major cap space and future flexibility to a coaching staff they might need to move on from in 2 years. So in 2028, when you realize this hire didn't work and you need to start over, you want to actually have the resources to rebuild the right way under the next coach. So what does disciplined free agency actually look like? Well, first, there are a few cap casualty conversations in the air, but Bobby Okereke is the only one I have real pushback on. Personally, I don't think the financial savings justify losing a reliable, productive defender who's also a team captain. Okereke has been one of the more consistent pieces on this defense, so unless they're forced into a difficult financial situation, I'd strongly lean towards keeping him. Now, when it comes to internal free agents, Jermaine Illuminor is a clear priority to retain. He's provided steady play at right tackle, and replacing capable offensive linemen is extremely difficult in free agency. Keeping him maintains stability for Jaxson Dart, which should be a top organizational priority. The next person we should talk about is Wan'Dale Robinson. At just 25 years old, he fits the developmental timeline and provides valuable versatility in the slot. While many mock drafts project the Giants targeting receiver early, retaining Robinson and addressing the position later in what projects to be a deep class is smarter long term. Wan'Dale Robinson also fits well in Matt Nagy's offensive concepts, which rely heavily on RPOs and screen packages that emphasize quick separation and yards after the catch. Financially, it might be difficult to retain both Illuminor and Robinson, and if forced to choose, the decision will likely depend on how they plan to address those positions in the draft. Personally, I'd retain Illuminor first if I had to choose between the two, because as I said, I think it's harder to find quality offensive linemen than it is to find wide receivers, especially in a class like this. Now, when it comes to free agency proper, there have been rumors connecting the Giants to players like Tyler Linderbaum, Alec Pierce, and Isaiah Likely. Now, we'll start with Linderbaum because he is an excellent center, and adding great offensive line talent is rarely a bad decision. However, signing him would require significant financial commitment, and the Giants aren't in cap hell, but they're not swimming in cap space either. And I think given their situation, investing heavily in one premium lineman might not be the most efficient use of resources right now, especially when you have long-term extensions for Jaxson Dart, Malik Nabers, and Cam Scatabo likely coming in your future. Now, Alex Pierce and Isaiah Likely are both talented skill players who could add explosiveness to this offense, but my concern is whether the current offensive structure is actually positioned to get the best use of those talents. Investing in playmakers only makes sense if the coaching staff can utilize those weapons effectively, and additionally, they already have cheaper alternatives in-house with these same archetypes with Darius Slayton and Theo Johnson. So in my opinion, I think free agency should be about filling in role players because this team already has stars, so I don't think they need a big splash. I think the first person I would target is Josh Jones, and he could be a great value signing as a backup left tackle for when Andrew Thomas inevitably gets hurt. If they do want to bring in a wide receiver, I think an affordable option is Kendrick Bourne, and that makes great sense as a complementary third receiver who can provide reliability without breaking the bank. And now this run defense has also been porous of late, so I think an interior defensive line should be priority. So I think Tim Settle or DJ Reader, for example, can be solid secondary interior presence when paired with Sexy Dexy. Now, if they were going to splash in free agency, I think the secondary is the place they should target. I think someone like Jalen Watson or Jamel Dean can help round out this defense and give Dennard Wilson more tools, so hopefully it's harder to mess this defense up. Now, as we start looking towards the draft, the first part I want to talk about is Kayvon Thibodeau and why I think trading him makes sense. So he's going to be a free agent after this year, and he hasn't justified the draft capital that's been spent on him. With Abdul Carter and Brian Burns already on the roster, you're not likely to extend him, so I trade him away now for some mid-round capital so that we can help build depth throughout the draft. And this is a weird spot for the Giants to be drafting at 105, because I don't know if they have one glaringly obvious pick here, and depending on what the Jets, Cardinals, and Titans do, there's a large range of possible outcomes. In a perfect world, the Giants would trade down a few spots. However, it takes two teams to make a trade, and I'm not sure if a trade up here makes sense for anyone else at the current moment, so I'm going to make a pick. And I've seen all different kinds of scenarios mocked here, and I often see wide receiver, but with Nabers, Dart, and Scatabo, I think a high-end receiver pick would be slightly wasted. That is a lot of mouths to feed, so that's one place I strongly push back on, especially considering how deep this class is. There's the possibility of offensive tackle. Both Francis Mauigoa and Spencer Fano are likely going to be around at this point. If Fano is there, I think that's a slam dunk pick. However, I think Arizona will snap him up, so I don't know if I'd take Mauigoa if he's available. So that leaves the defensive options. You have Ruben Bain, Arvell Reese, David Bailey, and Caleb Downs. Now, this defensive line is already strong, so I'm not sure if Bailey or Bain makes sense here. Arvell Reese has a very similar skill set to Carter, which will give extreme flexibility, especially in this scheme, but I do think he's going to be drafted before he gets to them at 5, so that leaves Caleb Downs. Now, this is very early to draft a safety, but Harbaugh has seen what a player like this can do in a scheme like this before with Kyle Hamilton in Baltimore. I think Caleb Downs makes the most sense here. He can help give this team a true star on the back end and help secure the run defense. We saw what a player like Devon Witherspoon can do from the slot in the Super Bowl, so I think there's a chance Downs can be the Giants' version of that role. Now, I don't think he has the same man coverage upside as Witherspoon, but he has great instincts and can fire off the ball in zone or against the run. If they decide it's too early for a safety, I would aim for one of the top corners like Mansour Delane or Jermon McCoy. I think this team could use a true boundary corner, and these guys could be great secondary options. In round 2, I would target Denzel Boston. He's the classic prototypical X wide receiver. Think Mike Williams, T. Higgins, Cortland Sutton. I think waiting to get a receiver like this as your wide receiver 2 makes so much sense. Nabers is an elite wide receiver who's your do-it-all guy. Getting a guy like Boston instead of a Cardinal Tate or Mekhi Lemon gives this team a more diverse skill set and helps them land a star on defense in the first round. So imagine this offense with Jaxson Dart, Malik Nabers, Cam Scatabo, Kendrick Bourne, and Denzel Boston. And then for the rest of the draft, I would keep it simple, and I think just target offensive and defensive line pieces to really help replenish the trenches of this roster. So here's the bottom line on the New York Giants. This was supposed to be the offseason where everything came together. The young offensive core is legitimately exciting, and the defensive talent is undeniable. For the first time in years, there were real building blocks to work with. Instead, Joe Schoen made a panic hire to save his own job, and it's going to cost this franchise years of potential. The narrative is going to be Brian Daboll couldn't get it done, but the reality is he was developing a functional offense with a rookie quarterback while his defensive coordinator was actively tanking the team. When one side of the ball is an active liability, no coach can succeed. But rather than fixing the actual issue, they brought in John Harbaugh, a guy who doesn't elevate organizations through scheme, but relies entirely on the staff around him. Then they give him coordinators who have been running some of the worst units in all of football. This is what organizational fear looks like. It's prioritizing job security over actually winning a Super Bowl. So that's why I'm saying pump the brakes on free agency. Don't mortgage the future for a coaching staff that's probably not going to be here in 3 years anyways. Keep your core pieces and add affordable depth. Use the draft to build players who'll still be valuable when the next regime takes over. Because comparing this roster to a lot of these crappy teams, like the Giants actually have more talent than people realize, but talent without the right leadership is just wasted potential, and that's what the Giants are setting themselves up for. The pieces are there, but the margin for error is thin, so if this coaching staff can't put it together, at least make sure the next staff has something to work with. With that being said, let me know in the comments what you think. Did the Giants make the right call by firing Daboll? Is Harbaugh going to work out? And what would you do at pick 105 in the draft? Drop your thoughts down below and check out this video that YouTube thinks you'll like.